بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا من إخواننا في إيران وفي فلسطين وفي غزة وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربنا وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامنا والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. صلى وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم وصل عليه. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Okay, so where were we? Let's go back a bit. So basically trying to problematize the concept of cause as used in physics or classical physics, in his understanding anyway, and trying to show its limitations. The limitations of the concept of cause are seen more clearly in subjects which deal with more complex organisms, especially living organisms. For example, so when we rise to the level, he said, when we rise to the level of, let's clear it a bit so we can go through it again. When we rise to the level of life, so life is a complex phenomenon, and mind is a complex phenomenon. The concept of cause fails us. Why? And to what extent? These are the two questions. Why? And obviously it doesn't fail it completely because we use the concept of cause in biology as well as in psychology and physiology and all other neurology and all those subjects. So it fails us in the sense that why it fails us and to what extent. So it doesn't completely fail us. We stand in need of concepts of a different order of thought. The action of living organism, and now he's trying to explain here, initiated and planned in the view of an end. Actions of living organisms, actions of animals, or actions of human beings are even more complex. So they involve the concept of the end. So the type of cause in physics is, I reckon, according to him, mostly efficient cause. But in understanding the action of living organisms, we need to invoke other types of causes. For example, teleological cause, let's say. What's the purpose of the action? So it's not something outside the action, but inside the action and the actor. And the purpose is something which is not prior to the action in a way. So it's not like cause and effect, where causes have a priority, at least in practice, and the effects come after it. So probably these sort of considerations are in his mind when he's talking about the action of living organism initiated and planned in view of an end is totally different to causal action. Totally. He's saying totally here. But we should ask. I don't think he thinks totally, but in a fundamental way. So, for example, let's see, a brick falls on a piece of glass or on a mirror, for example. So the mirror breaks. So the falling of bricks is the cause, and breaking of mirror is is a is an effect. But if I'm looking in the mirror, my face, and I don't like my face, well, I'm disgusted by the way it looks in the mirror. Or people, for example, in TV, they see Trump's speaking and they throw a brick and break the TV, for example. So that's the action of human being, if you try to understand. So your intention, so that's like a cause, but you will have a purpose as well. It doesn't exist when a brick falls on a mirror or on a TV, for example. Things like that. But so your purpose is not something which is an efficient cause. It's more like a teleological cause. So it's the end for which action was initiated, but that cause in a way is imminent in the action. It's not prior to action. Or something like that he has in mind. And his purpose is to just show the limitations of the mechanical concept of cause, not to reject it, obviously. And that will show him that, there are things which can't be explained fully through mechanical cause. And that will leave room for important things which he wants to save from mechanics. So that's the story. And the critique of mechanical causality Allama Iqbal is developing here is basically repeating, at least influenced by Hegel's critique of mechanical causality versus teleological purposiveness. And this obviously goes back to Aristotle. His categorization of four causes. So as we sort of looked in our contrast between a brick falling on a mirror and somebody throwing a brick to the mirror with a purpose. That showed that the action cannot be fully explained through, for example, the model of brick falling. So action is not just motion. It has something more. It has intention, which is a cause, but it's unlike motion in the sense that it involves something which is in a way imminent in the action, which is purpose, and which is not prior to action, but in a way it's the end of the action, but still the product of the action, or at least byproduct of the action. But it still guides the action, which is in a way a cause. So in this, the effect is in a way causing the cause. So that's the and the main point. His main point is to show the limitation of mechanical concept of cause, basically. So let's think a bit more about external mechanical causality. We can call it external causality as well. We call it external causality because cause is external to the effect. So for example, let's say more complex example for mechanism or external causality. A car, for example. So the concept of a car you can take anything. It can be a watch, exists in the mind of an engineer or a driver. So in a way, the car itself doesn't know its destination. Okay. And what happens is the parts of a car are aggregated and pushed by forces. The forces, different types of forces. Let's say which type forces we can have: combustion, electricity, steering, more mechanical. And these forces don't belong to the internal essence of, for example, the element of which car is made, for example, metal and plastic. But they are effects of aggregated parts and forces. So the parts are aggregated. The parts of a car and pushed by forces which do not belong to the internal essence of metal plastics. Okay, so these forces are acting on the parts, aggregated parts of a car. And the relationship between cause and effect is linear, A to B, even if A is complex, and indifferent in the sense that they are not part of they don't belong to the internal essence of a car or whatever the object we are thinking of. An action is from without, the cause is from without. Driver, steering, and the parts results in motion. These are external forces acting on the car to produce motion, for example. So the effect is a product of external necessity. Okay, so these are a few things about just repeating what basically said before, a bit more detail or complexity. Okay, now look at the other type of action, teleological action, for example. How that can be different from this type of causality. In this case, a subject matter that demands a concept of end, for example. The part of car doesn't have any end in that way. Without, obviously it has an end, but it doesn't have an internal end of its own. But in teleological concept of end resides in the object itself. In a way, it is self-determining. So, purportedly, obviously. So, for example, human subjects, it's not. Obviously, there are a lot of forces acting on me from without, but we sort of think of our action as self-determining in a way, in which the action of a car are not self-determining, even if it is an automatic car or robotic car. Yeah, so that's one difference. So in a way, imminent teleology, that is, the end is within the subject matter or object. So telos in that way is not in the future at the finishing point in the future, but an active principle present in the very beginning that guides the development of the subject. So, for example, human action. The purpose is, in a way, imminent in the nature of the human action itself. Not this or that purpose, but purpose as such, I guess. Okay. So in a way, if we contrast with our earlier example, mechanical cause and effect, so the relationship is linear and indifferent. That's what we said. Second, it is from without, transitive, and result or effect is a product of external necessity. So this applies when you try to understand the motion of a car, for example. On the other hand, the relationship between cause and effect is in this other sort of action, internal teleological causality, if you want to call it, is circular and self-referential. So human action is its own cause and determines its effects. So effects goes back to the action itself. Or the object itself. So that's the relation. And action is from within. So I'm doing something. So that's something I'm doing. The cause of my action is within, in a way. And effect is actualization of cause's own potential. So my ability to act potentially is actualized when I actually. So the effect is actually the actualization of my potential, my own potential, causes own potential. The effect is not external to. It is not the product of external necessity. Maybe it's a product of internal necessity. Okay, so at the conceptual level, what is the conceptual shift? One thing at the conceptual level we can see is that in a car, for example, the parts of a car are prior to the car as a whole. So, for example, if you take out the engine of a car, the engine is still there. So that's a mechanistic or mechanism, or that's a characteristic of mechanism. which is the basis of, in Iqbal's understanding anyway, physics, or at least certain type of physics, mechanistic physics. On the other hand, in teleology, the whole is prior to a part, for example. So in a way, if you look at the plant parts, the whole in a way has priority over parts. So parts don't exist without the whole. Similarly for human beings. Like even you cut hand, but the cut hand is not the hand in the same way as part of human being. So human being as a whole is prior to its part. So in plant or human beings, the whole actually dictates the function of every internal organ. And the purpose, whatever the purpose is, acts from within, because the part only exists for the sake of the whole. Plant, human being, etc. So that's a conceptual contrast. The car parts are prior to the whole. If you take the parts out, they still are the parts, but the whole doesn't function. The car stops if you the thing. On the other hand, whole is prior to parts. You take out your hand, the whole might still function, but the part doesn't. Part doesn't have its function. The part exists for the sake of the whole. So the efficient cause in the case of car from the final cause. So this is the here the final cause is reason, teleology. But in the final cause, the idea and reality are no longer external to one another, but are fused in a single self-moving purpose. On the other hand, in efficient cause, ideas and reality, for example, are external to each other. Okay, so that's the contrast he is working with here, and with the simple purpose of showing its limitation, the mechanistic physics, and that sort of is roughly based on Hegel's critique of mechanistic causality. So according to Hegel, mechanism treats the world as a collection of dead parts are pushed by external forces, as in the car. For Hegel, reality as a whole is rather organic whole, more like a plant rather than like a car, where the purpose is, for example, growth is internal. It is not externally imposed. So it is internal living power that organizes its part into a meaningful unity. So the question is whether we should understand the world as a whole on the example of plant or a car. So Allama Iqbal's view was that mechanistic physics tries to understand it on the example of a car rather than a plant. They think that it should be understood rather on the example of plant rather than car. Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't. There's no use for cars or thinking which builds cars, but that's just for a specific purpose that can't be projected into understanding the reality as a whole. I think that's the gist of it. So maybe we can. So the action of a living organism initiated and planned a view of an end is totally different to causal action. The subject matter of our inquiry therefore demands that the concept of end and purpose, which act from within, unlike the concept of cause, which is external to the effect and acts from without. No doubt there are aspects of the activity of a living organism which it shares with other objects of nature. In the observation of these aspects, the concept of physics and chemistry would be needed. But the behavior of the organism is essentially a matter of inheritance. So the concept is from within. The purpose is internal and incapable of sufficient explanation in terms of molecular physics. So there's a molecular explanation of a living organism, but it doesn't exhaust its explanation. It doesn't exhaust the reality of a living organism. However, the concept of mechanism has been applied to life, and we have to see how far that enters. Unfortunately, I'm not a biologist and must return to biology for further support. After telling us the main difference between a living organism and a machine, after telling us that the main difference between a living organism and a machine is that the former is a self-determining organism, so internal, and self-reproducing, J.S. Haldane says, and then there's a long quote from him. So we'll look at that next time, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.